I grew up on the West Coast, but I recently moved to the East Coast. And before I did, I had a lot of trouble finding videos on this topic. So I'm gonna talk a little about my experience moving from the West Coast to the East Coast. So I'm gonna try to keep this video as focused as possible, but this is a really broad topic. So I think part of what I wanna do is just kind of give myself room to give a little bit of like stream of consciousness. I actually even have a beer for myself, a local Asheville beer, because I made a video a while back about the pros and cons of living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and you guys really liked that video, and I had a cup of coffee during it. Let's do that, but Asheville style, which means you have a beer. If you're curious what I'm drinking, this is by Catawba. This is the Evening Joe Coffee Blonde. It's very good. Here we go. So first order of business, I have to explain just a touch of where I've lived. That really colors like your perception. I also want to throw in there that I kind of realized that really where I moved was from the West Coast to the South. That's the real like culture shift that I made. But first, let's go back to the beginning. In order to set the stage for where my perceptions of this whole move came from. My parents grew up in Southern California, but when I was only 3, maybe 4 years old, they moved us, my whole family, up to Northwest Washington State. So I grew up in Anacortes, Washington. It's a pretty small town. If you want to go watch what my experiences have been living in all the places I'm about to name to you, I'll have video links down below in the description. After I graduated high school, I moved to Salem, Oregon to go to Willamette University. So it's still pretty much the Pacific Northwest. Growing up, the only places we really like vacationed were either BC, Canada, because it was really close by, or we went down to Southern California to go visit family. And then when I was in college, I visited New Orleans, and that's where I first learned that some places don't have recycling, and that blew my mind. I studied abroad in Galway, Ireland, so that was like a real culture shock experience, actually living in a different country. And then finally I met my now husband, and he's from Maryland. So he's like this East Coast guy that I really like. I didn't know much about the East Coast. I had kind of a negative perception of the East Coast until I met him. And so then after we met, I visited his parents on the coast of North Carolina, so Eastern North Carolina, a couple times. We moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. We lived there for about 5 years. And then there was a year in between of those 5 years in the San Francisco Bay Area where we lived in China. So that was like the ultimate culture shock, of course. When we were figuring out where on earth we were gonna live, it was either gonna be Oregon or North Carolina. And I was pushing for Oregon, actually. It was more familiar to me. And I'm not saying I like didn't win the argument. I'm very happy here in Asheville. If you watched my last video, I announced at the very end that we are looking for a house. So we obviously really love it. I feel like I'm meant to be here, but I'm just saying that like culturally, I wanted to go, I was kind of in this like San Francisco like culture. I was ready to get out of the rat race. I was done with kind of these like super congested urban areas that were really expensive to live in and just tough. Like you give up a lot to live in one of those urban areas. However, I did like being around lots of like progressive, like-minded young people. So I kind of wanted to go to Oregon to be back in that Pacific Northwest culture where it's just sort of assumed that you have like low-key like hippie tendencies, I guess. So I was kind of holding on to the West Coast. I was kind of still a little bit anti-East Coast. In the rural areas, they're like racist, gun owners, hillbillies, rednecks. Like I had this such a perception in my mind of like what the South is. And then even like the Northeast, I had this perception of people being like rude and like not giving me the time of day, really like business oriented and like straight to the point. Up and down the East Coast, I had a pretty negative perception. So I was really scared to come to Asheville because it is kind of like this weird little hippie town in the middle of like a very conservative, like rural North Carolina area. So I was scared to come here. And after coming here, a lot of that fear has just washed away. I feel a lot more comfortable here than I ever thought I would. The South is so unexpectedly charming. There was one time where I was literally started tearing up because I was like, I just love the South so much. There's so much about the South and Southern culture that's so awesome. I think it's really hospitable, very like friendly. I know that there's these old notions of racism and these old notions of like the old times, the way things should be. Everyone has to go to church and all this stuff, like the Bible Belt. There's this old mindset that does exist in the South. However, my day-to-day experience with Southern culture is extremely positive. Like the Southern culture that I'm getting to know is much more welcoming than I expected it to be. And from what I'm seeing among the young people in the South, I think the South is going to have a major revival. I think the South is rapidly changing. When I talk about the South from a West Coaster's perspective, a lot of it just comes back to politics. And the more I talk about it, the more like unfair it feels, because I feel like I'm just talking about people's like perceptions of the world, which is their own thing. And I'm not really talking about people on an individual level. Ugh, this is so difficult to explain. My point is, the South is much, much less angry than I thought it was. It's much less backwards than I thought it would be. It's just normal people. It's really, when it comes down to it at its core, it's a different culture. West Coast culture, Southern culture are just different cultures. And that's the main thing I want to get across, is when you move from the West to the South, or the East to the Midwest, or anywhere within the US, if you aren't acknowledging that you are gonna deal with a cultural shift, you're gonna have a really hard time. The second you acknowledge that all you're trying to do is get used to this new culture, and it's just hard to get used to a new culture, as soon as you acknowledge that and let yourself struggle with trying to adapt to a new culture, you're gonna have such an easier time being here. So as soon as we got here, I was like, wow, this is a different culture, because I've lived in 3 countries now. I've lived in 4 states now, and I can just see it, and it's awesome. It should be celebrated. It's actually a really fun culture to be in. I just turned off the camera for quite a while to let my battery cool down, and now I have no idea what I was talking about. This video is going great. I hope this is what you were hoping for. Now I'm kind of transitioning out of the like regional stuff, and I'm going to talk more about like what it's been like to live specifically in Asheville. I also have some questions that you guys left me on YouTube and on Facebook. So Asheville, I think I need to make so many videos to explain the whole situation of what it's like to live here, but I'm sure you can tell from the grin on my face that this feels like a secret. It feels like I discovered a hidden gem, and I got super lucky with the timing of everything, and I am just living in like one of the coolest places ever right now. I will never stop thinking that the Pacific Northwest is the most beautiful scenery in the world. In my mind, it is. Like, I'm just right in my head. I have such pride for the Pacific Northwest, and I've never had such pride. It's so funny, like I've never felt more American than I did when I lived in Ireland or China. I've never felt more like a Pacific Northwesterner than I do now that I live here in the South. The best way to sum up Asheville is it's kind of, to me, it's a hippie paradise. There are actual seasons here, guys. I am looking at mountains literally right now. It's beautiful. There is incredible hiking around here. This is in the Appalachian Mountain area, so the Blue Ridge Parkway is like really close to me. There are a lot of bears here. I think in my last video I threw in a clip of the bears. I saw like 3 of them in our backyard just looking out the window of our apartment. There is a lot of stuff going on, just like activities, because it's a tourist town too, and it's kind of like a young person's town a little bit, I think, because of the college. A huge artist community. There are a lot of people who live in Asheville who are not from Asheville. A really typical story I've heard is people come to visit, they fall in love, they end up moving here. For the South, this is a more expensive city. Buying a home here is not easy when you grew up in this area and you have a job in this area. The only reason we've been able to jump into home buying so quickly is because we were coming from such an expensive place to live. Our deposit on the house we were living in before we moved into the townhome that we're in right now was like 6 times the deposit that we had here, just to put it in perspective for you. We actually felt the opposite when we moved from China back to California. Woo! That was rough financially. The beer here is next level. It's the best beer culture I've ever experienced. A lot of people claim it's because of the water. There actually are a lot of creeks. There's a couple rivers here in Asheville. There are waterfalls. I haven't seen the waterfalls yet, but I know they're here. We're not far from the Smokies. I have been able to join like a music jam group. I have a bunch of neighbor friends now. Someone has already offered to help us move. Just the sweetest people, and like very few people are from Asheville. My eyes are doing this because there's a hawk flying by. It's kind of cool looking. Yeah, Asheville's just, it feels like a little paradise. I'm gonna get into some of your questions. Alex asks, better beer? Yes, absolutely. Honestly, best beer ever. Someone asked, what has been your experience with Asheville so far? What do you think of the area? Wonderful experiences. Love the area. There's so much like nature around here, but you also have the amenities of a larger city. So Asheville's got about 90,000 people living in it, but there are so many tourists that come here each year. I can't remember the number, but it's a lot. So the infrastructure is really built for like the people who live here plus tourists. So there's just a lot going on all the time. There are a lot of restaurants. There's a lot of breweries. There's a lot of groups and activities, tours, and so many things happening. And the people are so nice. We're always just able to like talk to people randomly out in public and meet people. We've just like adapted so quickly because this place has been so welcoming. I don't know, my experience has been really positive in Asheville so far. How are the people? Wonderful. What's your favorite thing so far? What's your least favorite thing so far? My favorite thing about Asheville is probably the mountains or the people. I think the combination of like driving around on a daily basis, you get to see these gorgeous mountain views like all the time in combination with like just really kind people makes this such an awesome place. What's your least favorite thing? I sort of feel like I'm in this little bubble that I really like to be in, but like I'm not comfortable yet with being out right outside that bubble. I know deep down that it's fear of the unknown. I haven't explored out there yet, and that's it. That's why I'm often scared of the things I'm scared of, is because they're unknowns. The other thing I was thinking about saying, the fact that it is really difficult for people to find a job that pays well enough for them to live here comfortably. I brought my job from the Bay Area, so I didn't have to go seeking a job when we came here, and the unemployment rate is really low, but the jobs don't pay very well, and the rent keeps going up. The houses are a little more expensive than the surrounding area, and so that combination with jobs not paying very well is just, it makes it really hard to live here for someone who's actually from here. So it kind of feels like people like me who are coming in from places like California, Atlanta, it almost feels like we are sort of pushing the locals out. There probably is a lot of truth to that. Me knowing that I am kind of part of that problem, it's kind of sad. It's a really like ethically like gray area, but I don't know. What do you think about that? Put it in the comments. I'm curious. I've done a lot of thinking on that. I don't have a conclusion on how I feel about it. I wish everyone could just afford to live where they want to live, obviously. That's all. Anyways, Levi asks, how's the shopping? Are you able to easily find what you're looking for in a smaller town? It's like unexpectedly easy to find everything. From where I live right now, we are in East Asheville. I can get to like Target, Whole Foods, CVS, thrift stores, Best Buy, like everything in like less than 10 minutes. Only things I like can't get here. There's no IKEA here. There is no Lush here. I thought about getting Postmates one day. There's no Postmates here. But for the most part, like normal things are so easy to find. I even found like an Asian grocery store. Maybe I'll take you guys in there. I can even interview the guy who owns the shop. I can get whatever I want here, except like authentic Chinese food. Oh, I guess maybe another of my least favorite parts of living here is probably that the food is not as good as I expected it to be. And I think it's because my definition of good food is like authentic, unique cultural food. I think when I like have papaya salad and it's not spicy, I'm like, this isn't papaya salad. And like we went to an Asian fusion place and I could not understand like how there were so many flavors from so many cultures in one bowl. And like, I don't know, I'm just used to the Bay Area where it's like, what do you want for dinner tonight? And you're talking about culture. Do you want Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Thai? I love Asian food. I can't really find like the best Asian food around here, but slowly we are finding the good places. Chai Pani is one of my favorites. It's an Indian place. Anyways, on YouTube, Shannon Paris, who apparently is a realtor, asks, they call Asheville Little San Francisco. Do you feel like it is? I'm so glad someone asked this question. I would have kind of forgotten about this. I have heard this before. People call Asheville Little San Francisco. I think the idea comes from the fact that San Francisco in the late 60s and early 70s was sort of this like, you know, escape for hippies, sort of like socialist culture, progressive, like weirdos went there, you know, if you were a same-sex couple and you didn't want to feel like the pressure of like people judging you in your own community, you would maybe consider moving to San Francisco, like that kind of idea. That is totally a reason I would call Asheville a little San Francisco. I'm gonna regret this when I'm editing, but I'm filming the rest on my phone because my camera just keeps dying. Asheville is sort of like the escape for the freaks, the weirdos, the artists, the theater people, the gay people. So in that way, I can see why it's called a little San Francisco. However, I just moved from San Francisco, and it is not a little San Francisco here. San Francisco is not the San Francisco it was in the late 60s, early 70s. And so my experience in San Francisco, if I were to try to compare it to Asheville, I mean, the main thing I would just start talking about is like, Asheville is small. People are nicer. There's way less traffic. There's a lot more natural scenery. It's easier to get to a hiking spot. I can go to Target in and out in 20 minutes versus San Francisco where it takes like an hour. Quality of life is so much higher in Asheville than it is in San Francisco. It's less densely populated. I think overall when I hear, oh, it's like a little San Francisco, my immediate reaction is, no, it's not. But when I stop to think about it, I understand where that idea came from. I get that there's a little bit of truth in it for sure. So on my YouTube post, Miranda also left a comment asking me for a tour of Asheville. And Miranda, I have added that to my list of requests. If you have a request of something you want to see me film in Asheville, put it in the comments below. I'll add it to the list for sure. But I do have a really exciting announcement for you guys. Let me see if my camera is cooled down yet and I can actually film it in better quality. Hold on. So I feel like I did a really bad job on this video. At the end of the day, the answer really is it's different. It's not as scary as I thought it would be. It's more fun. It's more comfortable. It's better than I thought it would be. And I don't think I recognized the shift that I would experience in cultures when I first moved here. And once I started to recognize that, it made everything easier. So that's really the main takeaway that I want to kind of throw out there. I will be making a lot more videos about Asheville. Like I said in my last video, we are buying a house in Asheville. What I didn't tell you in that video, when I filmed that, we were already under contract on a house. So we had seen a bunch of different houses, and this one house in particular, I walked into and I started crying. I never thought I would have that reaction on a house. I wasn't like super tired or anything. It was just really weird. It was like, why am I so emotional about this house? And it's because I walked in and it was like immediate, this is perfect. This is the perfect size. This would work great for us. It has an incredible kitchen. It has a garden. It has room for a chicken coop. It has the right number of rooms. We can each have our own office there because my husband and I both work from home. So this house was just like perfect right away. And I didn't want to get my hopes up until the very last moment. And that moment is here. We're just waiting to close on the house. We're going to be moving there in a couple of weeks. I am extremely excited. We've just been in such a state of transition that I feel like I kind of let myself slip a little bit with this channel where I'm like, it's okay. Like, you have a lot going on right now. It's all coming to an end here really soon. It's actually gonna get really hectic here. We're gonna have to start packing up soon, figure out how to get a fence installed in this house. Like, we're gonna be first-time homeowners. This is really, really exciting. We are staying in the East Asheville area. I'll probably avoid filming the outside of the house, but other than that, I wanna share the experience with you guys. I wanna document it for myself. Do you guys want to see any video clips of some of the houses I looked at and did not choose? Because I do have some on my phone. They're all vertical. We're like really settling here in Asheville. We've moved so much as a couple. I've been feeling like the universe is screaming at me, like this is where you're meant to be right now. It's all just super exciting. I'm just gonna keep blabbering on if I don't stop myself now. So comment below, what did I not talk about in this video that you thought I was gonna talk about, that you want me to talk about in the next video? What about the house are you curious about? What about Asheville are you curious about? I wanna hear your questions, thoughts. If you have any comments, you got a hot take on some opinion I shared. This has been an interesting video to film. I will talk to you guys very soon. Thank you for watching. Okay, bye.